Hello, everyone. Just for you know, I will be posting on Blackboard as well as Pronto. I'm not going to be in class this week. I'm in Houston dealing with some family issues. So what we're going to do, I'm going to go ahead and start lecturing and make a video lecturing about Chapter 4, the Bill of Rights, that you'll need to watch, that kind of stuff. When I come back, if you have any questions about anything, if you weren't sure about some of the stuff we talked about, or you just had questions or were curious about something that that I talked about in this presentation, we'll have some time to talk about those things and answer questions when I come back next week. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and start off dealing with Chapter 4, the Bill of Rights. And the primary thing we will be talking about when we talk about the Bill of Rights is the concept of civil liberties. Okay, now earlier in the year semester, we had talked a little bit about them in conjunction of talking about civil rights and how these were similar concepts with important distinctions. Okay, and that civil rights were protections that marginalized groups, people or groups who have been discriminated against, there were policies to make sure that they were given their rights. Civil liberties are those rights. Okay, and most of what civil liberties are, these are individual, legal, and constitutional protections against government. In other words, these are things that are rights that limit what the government can and cannot do. Okay, and so when the founding fathers created the country, they created the Constitution. Afterwards, people had questions about it. And so they wanted to limit what the government could do. And so they created what became known as the Bill of Rights, which is simply the first 10 amendments. Well, when it comes to civil liberties, most of what we think of as civil liberties are found in the first 10 amendments to the Constitution. There are civil liberties that are found in the main body. Okay, one of those would be no ex post facto law, which basically prohibits the making something illegal or increasing its punishment if it is already illegal after somebody's committed the act, and then punish them when they couldn't be punished before, or increase whatever that punishment was. The other is what's known as the writ of habeas corpus, and this is literally Latin for produce the body. If you're familiar with any of the crime drama shows like Law and Order or Law and Order SVU or any of the things such as that, writ of habeas corpus is when you're brought in front of a judge and the prosecutor tells the judge why you were being detained, that you've been accused of XYZ crime, and here is some of the evidence to sustain that detention. So they got to provide, they don't have to provide ironclad proof. They just have to provide enough probable cause or a reasonable suspicion that you committed this crime, therefore they can detain you. Okay? Most of what we're going to talk about, though, is found in the Bill of Rights, which most people know is the first 10 amendments to the Constitution. And so when you look at the Bill of Rights in our civil liberties, and you ask most Americans about their civil liberties, they generally support civil liberties, or our civil liberties, in the abstract. If I was in class and I asked you, or the class, should the police be able to go into your home, go through all of your stuff, go into your cell phone, go through every file on your cell phone, on your computer, whenever they felt like they needed to? Almost every one of you would say no. That was an invasion of my privacy. They don't have a right just to do that because they feel like it. Okay? But when that is actually practiced, put into practice, the support for that goes down. Because as we will talk about, it can result in people who are very obviously guilty of very heinous crimes potentially walking free. Okay, so for example, let's say instead of me being a professor here at SDC, and I live in a apartment there in Edinburgh. I live in Cimarron Plantation. Have one of the biggest houses there. Instead of driving around in a 7-year-old Toyota Tacoma, I drive a $500,000 Lamborghini. But my neighbors notice I never seem to go to work. They can't really figure out how I'll support my lifestyle. And I have a weird pattern of people coming at all times, day and night. And so they get kind of suspicious that, I'm probably involved in the drug trade. So they contact the police, and the police kind of investigate. They can't find where I seem to have a job. They can't seem to find where I have a business or a trust fund or anything. They can't figure out how I'm maintaining my standard of living. And they do just determine that I do have a very unusual pattern and volume of people coming and going to my house. And so after a while, they get enough information that they have probable cause to get a search warrant. And so they get a search warrant, and they show up to my house, they knock on the door. I open the door, and they hand me a search warrant saying they're searching the premise. And what the search warrant says is that they have a right to look in this house, and they get to look for drugs, cash, and other articles associated with drug activity. And so they begin to search my house high and low, and they don't find as much as a single joint. Finally, there's really only one place they haven't searched. In one of the bedrooms is a very large antique armoire. And if you don't know what that is, it's just a piece of furniture that works as a closet. But this is a 500-year-old antique, very expensive. It's worth $50,000. They try to open the door and it's locked. Well, do I have to open the armoire? Well, actually, I don't have to go and use the key and open it if I don't want to, but they're going to break in if I don't and be legally justified in doing so. And since this is a very expensive antique, I go and open it, unlock it, and they open the door, and what they find is a series of shelves. And on the shelves, what they find is a flat screen TV, a high-end computer, an industrial-grade DVD burner, and video and audio equipment, very expensive video and audio equipment. Below that is a series of drawers, and when they open the drawer, what they find are literally thousands of the writable DVDs, the kind that you can get at Walmart. But they don't find any drugs, they don't find cash, they don't find weapons, they don't find anything that's on search warrant. And so most of the police walk off and they start trying to figure out their next move. But this one officer gets really curious because as he opens every drawer, there's just thousands of these DVDs. And when he pulls them out and looks at them, they have different names on them. And so he gets a little curious and he turns on the TV, he turns on the computer, he opens it up, puts the DVD in, and pushes play. Almost immediately pops up on the screen is an image of the bed that's in the room. Within just 20 or 30 seconds, what he quickly realizes is that it is a video of child pornography. I'm not a drug dealer. I'm a child pornographer. I've been making my money selling child porn, which, as you can imagine, is just a wee bit illegal. And so they tell me I'm under arrest for child pornography. Before they handcuff me, I ask them, where are you taking me? Because tell them I'm going to contact my lawyer. So I call my lawyer and tell them, hey, they're taking me to the Mission Police Station. You need to meet me there. And so eventually my lawyer gets there, and I get to talk with my lawyer. And my lawyer is one of the most expensive lawyers in the state of Texas. He's one of the better defense attorneys. And I explained to him exactly what went on and all of that kind of stuff. And after we've had a chance to talk, in comes the district attorney and the lead investigator. And the assistant district attorney comes in and he's got a smile on his face from ear to ear. And walks in and kind of rubs his hands and says, hey, I got the deal for the century for your client. How about if I, for all charges, 50 years to life? Because, I have enough evidence here to send them away for 1,000 years. At least maybe I would have a chance to to get out of prison. Well, my attorney kind of looks at him, kind of puzzled, and said, why in the world would my client plead guilty to anything? You don't have evidence of a crime. The district attorney says, I have thousands of DVDs with child pornography on it, videoed in his house. And my attorney kind of looks at him, kind of grins and smiles and goes, shakes his head and says, no, you don't. You need to talk to your investigators. What is the problem? The problem is they were looking for drugs, cash, other stuff associated with drug activities, drug smuggling, that kind of stuff. When that officer pulled out that DVD and determined indeed it was a DVD, it was not on the list of things they were looking for. When the officer put it into the computer and pushed play to watch the video, he violated my Fourth Amendment rights against unreasonable searches and seizures. The warrant was for drugs, not child pornography. Okay? And so the next day, I get in front of a judge, and my attorney says, Your Honor, you know, they conducted an illegal search. They were looking for drugs. When they recognized that these were DVDs, they should have left them alone. The district attorney begs the judge not to dismiss the case, saying this is one of the worst cases of child pornography in the country for many, many years. But the judge is going to look at him and kind of go, well, my hands are tied. Your officers conducted an illegal search. And under what is known as the exclusionary rule, if the police violate your Fourth Amendment rights to obtain evidence of a crime vis-a-vis violating those rights, then that evidence must be suppressed and cannot be used against you in trial. Well, that's the only evidence they have. So the district attorney or the judge says, okay, case dismissed. I'll walk out a free man. I quickly sell my house. I sell my car. I've made quite a bit of money. You know, I wasn't involved in actually having sex with kids. That wasn't my thing. And so I just made money doing it. I was completely immoral, but I didn't do, that wasn't my thing. So I moved to an island somewhere in the tropics, and the rest of my life is a beach. Okay, and I enjoyed the rest of my life living a life of luxury on the money I made. Now, often students will ask things like, well, won't they try to find the kids? And the answer to that is definitely yes. They're going to bend over backward to try to find out who these kids are. For no other reason than they're going to need some serious psychological counseling, other stuff, because there's very important reasons why child pornography is illegal, is because it is extremely damaging to the child. And the government can make it illegal because they have a compelling public interest to protect children. So yeah, they will try to find those kids. Well, often people will ask, well, can't they use the kids' testimony? And the answer to that is no. There is a concept in American jurisprudence called the fruit of the poisonous tree. And basically what that means is any evidence resulting from an illegal search cannot be used against you. It is considered illegally obtained evidence. So even if they can find the kids, even if the kids pick me out of a lineup and say, yes, this is the guy that videoed this, blah, 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 they cannot use those kids' testimony against me because they found out about it and found out about these kids as a result of the illegal search. Now, here's one of the things that can be really ironic. While they cannot use the videos, they cannot use the kids' testimony against me. the other men that were in the videos actually having sex with the kids, if those men can be identified, they can be charged. The children can testify against them. They can use the video against them. Now, you might ask, why? You can't use it against me. How can you use it against these other men when my video has been suppressed? Well, the answer is actually rather simple. My rights were violated, not theirs. The fact that the police found out about this information and got this evidence by violating my rights has no impact on their trial. And so they will go to prison for the rest of their life while I get to live on the beach enjoying the rest of mine. Okay? And so one of the issues with civil liberties is Americans support them in the abstract. When you ask Americans, should the police be able to go into your home, go through all your stuff, whenever they feel like it, everybody will say no. But when the enforcement of those rights results in an obviously guilty party, okay, guilty of one of the most heinous crimes that can be committed, the sexual exploitation of children, and they have to be let free, then people support begins to wane. Almost everybody looking at that situation, at the very least, it makes their stomach turn, because it means a guilty person has to go free. Well, when you look at the Bill of Rights, not all the Bill of Rights are considered or given the same amount of importance. And generally speaking, there is a hierarchy that starts with the first of the amendments, and it's important as you go through. And so, generally speaking, the most important civil liberty that most people feel is the most important is the First Amendment. And well, what does the First Amendment do? Well, there's actually two parts to it. One is what's often referred to as freedom of expression. You have the right to express your opinions or beliefs. And the government's ability to limit that is very limited. Okay? The other is freedom of religion. You have the constitutional right to practice your religion, believe in anything that you want. As we'll talk about, sometimes, and it's a very limited circumstances, you might not be able to practice those beliefs, but the belief in them is protected regardless. And so when you look at freedom of religion, let's look at freedom of religion to begin with. If you look at America's levels of religious freedom, how much of freedom of religion does America have? Well, America has among some of the greatest levels of religious freedom in the world. Literally, there's no religion, there's no religious belief that is illegal. Matter of fact, if you can't find a religion that you like in this country, you can create your own and have all the rights that the Catholic Church, the Protestant denominations, Islam, Judaism, Buddhism, any ism that you can think of that are thousands of years old, you have the same rights. You can have a place of worship that you don't pay taxes on. You can collect tax-free money. You can do everything that other churches can do. The government cannot evaluate the validity of your religious beliefs. If you say these are my religious beliefs, they must accept them at face value. And that your religion and your religious beliefs are equally protected to somebody who's a Christian, which these beliefs have been around, as all of you I'm sure are familiar, for over 2,000 years. And if you're talking about the Old Testament, much longer than that. Well, when it comes to freedom of religion, there's a number of important components to that. One of the first, and one of the more controversial, at least with some groups, is what is known as the No Establishment Clause. And what the No Establishment Clause says is that the U.S. government cannot establish or endorse a particular church or religion or create an official religion for the United States. Now, often I hear people say, America is a Christian nation. Historically speaking, that was both right and wrong, true and false. Even today, most Americans have religious beliefs. Of that, the biggest component is Christian. But America's government is what's known as officially secular, which means that it is non-religious. Now, some people might ask, well, what about, the Ten Commandments, and it says, thou shalt not kill. Well, if you look around the world at religions, most every religion, most every society in the world has prohibition against killing, particularly against what they would deem as murder. If you actually look at the Ten Commandments, God doesn't have a whole lot of problem in the Old Testament of killing people. Okay, but they have to be the right people. Okay, and so it's really a prohibition against murder. Murder means you kill somebody without just cause. And so America's government is secular. It is non-religious. Well, what does that mean? Well, one thing that means is that government, for the most part, now there are exceptions as we will talk about, must stay out of religion. And so the government may not make a law respecting religion. So it can't make a law saying this religious belief is okay, this religious belief isn't, this religious belief is valid, this religious belief isn't. It can't say this religion is valid and this religion is not. Okay? And so it has to stay out of religion. Okay? Except for a very tiny set of circumstances. And as we'll talk about, that's when the actual religious beliefs themselves are illegal and the government has to have a very compelling reason not to allow it. Okay? And so the government has to stay out of religion. But religion has no official role in government. Okay? The U.S. government is not Christian. It is secular. And so you cannot have any official role for the government in religion. Or religion in the government, to say. When you look at this, one of the great examples that is still controversial today, although it's been the law of the land since I was a little kid, and I mean little, 2 or 3 years old, is school prayer. In the public schools, now private schools are a totally different animal, okay, but in the public schools may not endorse a particular religion. And so one of the great examples is school prayer. Okay, it is illegal, it's unconstitutional for a public school to endorse a Christian prayer. Okay, now you may have a right of a minute of silence for reflection. If you choose to pray, that's one thing. If you don't, you just have to remain silent and be quiet. Okay, for that 1 minute. Okay, but when it comes to school employees, your teachers, the paras, the principals, the counselors, heck, even the lunch ladies, okay, they must leave their religious beliefs at the schoolhouse door. They may not discuss their religious beliefs with students. They may not tell students that they should believe a certain way. Any of these kind of things. That's why you're not allowed to wear a crucifix, at least where you can see it. These kind of things. And the reason is quite simple. You, as an employee of the school district, are the physical embodiment of the government. Now, you have the right to your religious beliefs. You may practice your religious beliefs. But when you walk in that school door, you must leave your religious beliefs behind. If you don't, and you try to spread them to children, the kids, students, that kind of stuff, it is grounds for termination. Because you're not only violating Supreme Court rulings, you're violating federal law that says you may not do so. Okay? And so the school employees, the school itself, cannot endorse, have school prayers, that kind of stuff. Now, ironically, you as a student, do you have the right to express your religion and your religious beliefs? And the answer is yes. To tell you you may not wear a crucifix, that you may not wear a yarmulke, that you may not wear the hijab if you're a Muslim woman, is to violate your First Amendment right to freedom of religion. The only thing that the government, the school can do is if what you're doing is disruptive. If you're disrupting the school performance or the school environment, you can be told you got to stop doing what you're doing. But they cannot tell you you cannot explore or display your religion. So, for example, back in the mid and the late 90s was when I first started teaching school. I started teaching public schools. There was a period of several years that young people, particularly high school, got really curious about the occult. You know, seances, Ouija boards, Satanism, all of that kind of stuff. And some students started wearing Marilyn Manson, if some of you may have heard of him. Some of his t-shirts, that kind of stuff. And he would have the pentagram. If you don't know what the pentagram is, that's usually the symbol for the occult, especially devil worship and that kind of stuff. And it's simply an upside down Star of David. The school said, you may not wear that. That is, you're promoting a particular religion that is wrong, that is disruptive. You can't do that. The school policy says you cannot do that. Well, some bright kids that were doing that found an attorney. They sued some of the schools and said, hey, devil worshiping is my religion. When I wear this pentagram, whatever, with Marilyn Manson on it, I'm expressing my religious beliefs. And lo and behold, the courts told the schools, you may not suppress their religious beliefs. And so they had to allow the kids to wear the pentagrams and everything else. If you allow Christians to wear crosses, if you allow Jews to wear the Star of David, if you allow Muslims to wear their symbols and all of this kind of stuff, you have to. But when it comes to school prayer, people for years have wanted to bring back school prayer. Various religious groups have, conservative religious groups. And this is a great example of a thing where the idea that be careful what you wish for, because you just might get it. And what that means is that when these groups think, oh, we're going to bring back school prayer, they are thinking, I'm going to bring back the prayer that I like. Okay, and for Christian groups, for example, probably you get most Christian groups, if not all of them, to agree to the Lord's Prayer. Most of them could probably look at that and say, yeah, that's a prayer that we can accept. Well, what would be the problem? Well, if the Supreme Court was to ever overturn the prohibition against school prayer, it would open the floodgates, because every religion could demand to have their prayer, including devil worshippers. These parents who are screaming, groups that are screaming they want to bring back school prayer, how do you think they would react if their child had to listen through a Muslim call to prayer and a holy man reading from the Quran? Or even worse, a devil worshiper prayer. They would have a aneurysm. Okay? And so you don't want to do that. You can't just bring back your religion. If you bring prayer back into schools, it brings back all of them. Now, private schools, some of you might wonder, why can they have things like school prayer? Matter of fact, they can require you to have school prayer and to pray and do all that kind of stuff. It's real simple. They're private. They're not the government. They may be providing you an education, but they're private. And as we will discuss more later, in your private life, you had the right to discriminate. You have the right to do things like pray and require in your institution that people pray and that they believe in your religion and all of these kind of things. The reason private schools can do it is because they're private. They're not the government. The government can't, the public schools can't, because they literally are the physical embodiment of the government. Well, that's a short take on the freedom of religion. The other part of freedom of religion, okay, is what's known as the Free Exercise Clause. And this allows people to exercise or practice their beliefs or their religion. And you may believe in anything that you wish. There is no religious belief that is illegal. You may espouse it. You may try to get people to come into your church or your religion. One of the great examples of this is atheism. Okay, many people are surprised to find out that the Supreme Court has ruled that atheism is a religion that doesn't believe in religion, in effect. And so they're able to have a house of worship, tax-free. They can bring in tax-free money, just like any other religious group. Well, when it comes to the Free Exercise Clause, like I say, there is no belief that is illegal. There is no religion that is illegal. But you might not be able to practice all of your beliefs. If one of your beliefs in and of itself is illegal, the government might be able to, if it's compelling enough, they have a compelling enough public interest to prevent you from being able to practice your religion. So, for example, back in the 70s, a number of churches were organized that argued that the central tenet, one of them, of their beliefs was that in order to communicate with God, they had to be high on marijuana. And so that a central part of their religion was smoking marijuana in their religious ceremonies. And that since this is a key component of their beliefs, they cannot be arrested for having, for transporting, and for smoking marijuana vis-a-vis their religion. Okay? Well, what did the federal courts, what did the U.S. Supreme Court say? Well, they said no, that you may not use marijuana in a religious ceremony and be protected from prosecution. And the Supreme Court had a number of reasons for this. It said, first of all, he said these religions were a very obvious, blatant, transparent attempt to get around the marijuana laws. Second of all, the members of this church did not primarily smoke marijuana in their religious ceremonies. They primarily smoked it recreationally. And so they smoked it to get high and to have fun, not for their religion. Also, the government said that these were new religions that just did not have a long track record of using illegal drugs, and in this case marijuana, in their religious ceremonies. And so they were not protected. And they could be arrested and sent to prison. All of these things for smoking marijuana. Even they literally were doing it in their church in order to communicate with God. Okay? Well, some of you might ask, well, what about the Native Americans? Because they can use, and some of the groups can use an illegal substance in their religious ceremonies. And some of you probably even know this is peyote. If you don't know what peyote is, it's a small cactus. and it's what's known as a hallucinogenic. And most of you, I'm sure, know what a hallucinogenic is. Basically, they make you see an alternative reality to the world, kind of a true story. There are numerous different hallucinogenics, one of which are magic mushrooms. There are mushrooms that have chemicals in them that have a psychedelic properties. If you know what mushrooms to go get, if you know how to process them, you can get high on these mushrooms. Well, it just so happens that yours truly knew a guy in college that knew about this. And I went to school up in Huntsville, north of Houston. And out in the cow pastures, after every rain, a few days later, there would be these mushrooms that would grow up in the cow patties. Well, if you knew which ones to pick, they had a psychedelic compound. And so this guy knew which one to go get, and he got it, and he knew how to process it, and he powdered it to make mushroom tea. Well, in many ways, luckily, me and this one other guy had to work that night. Well, we get off 1:30, 2 o'clock in the morning. We get back to the apartment, and all of our buddies are tripping. They had, luckily, in many ways, drank all the tea. Okay? And they were literally tripping like nobody's business. One of my buddies was laying on the ground on the floor of the apartment. It was summertime, so the ceiling fan was going. They had all the doors and windows open. And he was laughing, pointing his finger at the ceiling fan. You would have swore he thought that ceiling fan was the funniest thing he had ever seen. Well, me and the other guy ended up spending the entire night babysitting our friends because we lived on the second floor. We were not far from a really busy street that had high-speed traffic on it, and we were afraid our friends could get hurt or even killed. Okay, and so we ended up having to babysit them all night. And the one buddy whose name was Jamie in the morning, once he came down off his high, kind of asked him about it and said, "Well, what was it like?" And he said, "Oh my God, Jerry." He said, "It was the weirdest thing. I was seeing flavors and tasting colors. Everything was inside and out, backward and forward." He said, and so I asked him, I said, "Well, when are you going to use it? Try it again." He said, "Man, I ain't never using that again. Just give me my beer." Okay. Well, peyote is a psychedelic plant. Okay. And so Native Americans can use peyote in their religious ceremonies. Well, why can the Native Americans use it in their ceremonies when these other religions, other churches, couldn't use marijuana? Well, there's a number of important distinctions. First of all, truly religious Native Americans, which most of them who are practicing this way are, they will only use peyote for religious purposes. It's not really a recreational drug anyway, big time, but they only use it in religious ceremonies. To do otherwise would be sacrilegious. And so when you look at Native Americans using peyote, it would be like someone who here in the Valley is very religiously Catholic. The only problem is they happen to be an alcoholic. They're not going to go to the basilica there in San Juan, break into the basilica, and drink all the sacramental wine. Now, they need their alcohol fix. They're craving their alcohol, but they're not going to do that because to do so would be sacrilegious. They may go to Feldman's and break into Feldman's to get the alcohol that they need, but they're not going to break into the basilica. And so for Native Americans, the only reason they use peyote is in their religious ceremonies. To use it any other way, they would consider it to be sacrilegious. The other major factor that allowed them to use it is that they know that Native Americans, particularly the Plains Indians and some in the Intermountain West, have been using peyote for at least, this is the minimum, at least 500 years. And it is very likely that Native American tribes, even before the ones we know of today, recognize today, even really kind of formed and exist were using peyote. And so one of the key distinctions the Supreme Court made when it came to the use of peyote is that Native Americans use it only for religion, and they've been doing it way before the U.S. even existed. The people wanting to use marijuana were trying to get around the marijuana laws. They were trying to find a loophole that would allow them to smoke marijuana when they otherwise couldn't. Native Americans' use of peyote predates even discovery of America, the Americas by Columbus, and so and predates the American government by 300 plus years. And so they weren't trying to get around the marijuana laws because they were practicing it way before the U.S. government even existed. And so they may use peyote in their religious ceremonies. And they actually are licensed. A number of Native Americans can get a license from the federal government to allow them to collect peyote for use in their religious ceremonies on their reservations. Well, does anybody know where they get the bulk of their peyote from? Some of you might, some of you may not, but they get it in the Rio Grande Roma area, right up the road from us. And so every year, people come down, Native Americans, with a license that allows them to harvest up to X amount of peyote legally. Now, I had a lady in my class years ago. Her grandparents used to own a ranch in the Rio Grande City area, and she was told me that she remembers as a child when the Indians would show up to pick peyote. Now, is it legal for you to have peyote growing on your property? The answer is yes. It is a native plant. It grows naturally all through the Rio Grande City, Roma area, all the way up through Laredo, well north and well south of there. And so it's perfectly normal for it to be in that region. What you cannot do is harvest it for people and try to sell it. That's illegal. That's drug trafficking. And neither can you plant it in nice, neat rows, irrigate it, and all of that. That would be illegal as well. And so you have to allow it to grow naturally. Okay? But if it grows naturally on your farm or on your land, no harm, no foul, you may actually charge the Native Americans money to get onto your farm, to your property, and then tell them you may collect X amount for this use to get known. And so while you can't sell them the marijuana, the peyote directly, you may sell access to your property and then put restrictions on their access, including you can only collect X amount. Okay, so they don't collect all of it, for example. And then next year they'll have to come back and pay you again. You can turn it into a money-making enterprise for your property. All right, well, that is freedom of religion. That's all we're going to talk about when it comes to the First Amendment. The other part of the First Amendment is what's known as freedom of expression. And freedom of expression is quite simply your First Amendment right to express your opinions or your beliefs. Okay? And you can kind of divide freedom of expression into three kind of broad categories. Okay? Two very close to each other, one very different. The first two would be the spoken and written word. And this is what most people think of when they think about the First Amendment. Okay, I have the right to say my beliefs. I have the right to write down my beliefs. Okay, I even have the right to disseminate my belief, even if those beliefs are abhorrent to the vast majority of the population. So, for example, white supremacists, members of the KKK, neo-Nazis, these groups have the right to express what their beliefs are. They have the right to try to convince people to join them in their beliefs. They have the right to write them down, do all that kind of stuff. Okay? So the expression of their beliefs is perfectly legal. Okay? For example, Twitter. There's nothing the government could do about a neo-Nazi or a skinhead or a Klansman or woman getting on Twitter and posting all kinds of racist, homophobic, transphobic memes, say the most disgusting things about people. And there's nothing the government could do about it. Now, could Twitter, at this point in time, legally? Yes. Twitter is a private company. And so you don't have a constitutional right to express your beliefs on their platform if they say those beliefs violate their terms of use. Now, some of you may know that Elon Musk recently bought Twitter, and he tends to be more towards the absolutist side of the freedom of expression, and says that, if you don't like someone's beliefs, there are two things to do. You can ignore them, not listen to them, that kind of stuff, or you can try to debunk them. You can argue against them. But his idea is that you can't keep them from expressing their beliefs. Social media is a particular issue on this regard, because it is and does enable groups that traditionally had a hard time communicating with each other because they're spread across the country. Their beliefs are generally not widely accepted and are often widely condemned. But social media allows them to connect to one another and do all that kind of stuff. And so right now, social media groups, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, Facebook, TikTok, whatever social media you can think of, they have the right to say who and who cannot get on their platforms. Matter of fact, they could say, we will not allow anybody who's a conservative Republican. We will not allow anybody who's a woke Democrat, whatnot, to get on their program or use their platform. It's private. They get to decide who can and cannot use it. Now, could something happen? Could the courts do something to say that they can't do that? Well, there is at least a certain amount of precedence for that, and he actually has had some Supreme Court justices at least express kind of that kind of idea. And one of the examples that's already been done are both the Republican and Democratic presidential primaries. That the Supreme Court ruled that despite the Democratic and Republican Party being private organizations, they formed such an important public function, they decided who was going to get elected, that process had to be made public. That they could not say, well, we don't let black people or Mexican Americans or this group or that group from participating in our primaries. Okay, because in effect, if you didn't vote, couldn't go with the Democrat or Republican, those are only two people that really have a legitimate shot at winning in our elections. Third-party candidates just don't really have that much of a chance, as we discussed earlier in the semester. And so the one thing that they could do is say, okay, TikTok, YouTube, Facebook, you are the new town square. You are where everybody goes to express discuss the important issues of the day. Therefore, Facebook or Twitter or whatnot, you may not limit people's access based on their expressed beliefs. You must abide by the First Amendment, freedom of expression. Okay, now, would that mean they would have to allow things like child pornography? No, child pornography is illegal. Would they have to allow people threatening to kill people, blow things up, or do that kind of stuff? No, that is illegal, as we will discuss. Okay, they would be able to keep that stuff from happening. What they couldn't do is say, well, I don't like this group. We don't like the Proud Boys, which, if you don't know who they are, they're a right-wing, kind of a borderline white supremacist group, more border than not, and more likely to be a white supremacist group than not. But you wouldn't be able to tell that group, because of your beliefs, you can't get on our platform, although it's private. Okay, and by the way, social media companies probably would love that. Okay, if all of a sudden the Supreme Court said you may not do that, for them that makes life a lot easier. So when people go and start yelling at them about allowing these groups on social media, their platforms, they could just say, hey, don't yell at me, go yell at the Supreme Court. I'm having to do this because I don't have any choice. Although they like it because now they can just go ka-ching. We don't have to worry about keeping these groups off, and we can just make more money. And so you have the written and the spoken form. The third form is what's known as symbolic speech. And symbolic speech are actions or images that convey an opinion or belief. And as we'll talk about, those get a lot more complicated. Okay? And that's what they can get also a lot more divisive, because they often can be much more painful for people, that kind of stuff. And it can be more of a gray area. Is this protected? Is this not? And let you know, often the case is, yes, it's protected. Far more often than, no, it is not. Okay? Well, when you look at the government's ability to limit freedom of expression, there's only a very small number of areas that the government may restrict freedom of expression. And when they can do that, not only is it limited, but how they can do that is limited. Okay? And so one of the big reasons why the government may limit somebody's speech, and this is temporary, is to maintain public order. The classic example of this is that you cannot go into a crowded movie theater and scream fire when there is no fire. Now, you have a First Amendment right to speak. Generally, you can get out and say whatever you want to say. But you can't yell fire in a crowded theater that there's no fire. Well, why not? Well, the answer is really kind of simple. You could cause a panic. People could get injured. They could indeed even die. And there's no fire. Well, what if you yell fire in a public theater and there is a fire? What are you? Quite honestly, you're a hero. Okay, you got people out and saved lives. If people get hurt, or God forbid, if people die, you're not responsible. Matter of fact, you can't be sued. Anything, as long as what you did was in good faith. You'd come under what's known as the Good Samaritan laws, which protect you as long as what you did in good faith. And if there was a fire, you're automatically, you did what you did in good faith. And so the government can do it to maintain public order, but only temporary. So you can't say, well, the Klan and the neo-Nazis, they're not locked in our neighborhood. If they come down here and and do stuff, there could be a riot. Okay, government, you can, as we'll talk about, restrict them temporarily just to get ready. But eventually, you're going to have to let them. Okay? The other is in areas of national security. Okay? And so, if I have information that would be embarrassing to the U.S. government, okay, but it really wouldn't jeopardize national security, the government can't prevent me from publishing it. Now, here's the catch. If my possession in or publishing of that information is a crime, it breaks federal law. While they might not be able to prevent me from doing that, they could punish me after the fact. If it's a 20-year prison sentence in federal prison for doing it, they take me to federal court in front of a federal jury. The jury finds me guilty. The sentence is 20 years. Well, guess what? You're going to spend the better part of 20 years in federal prison. Now, you had a First Amendment right to do that as far as expressing yourself, but the government can punish you. Okay? Example when they could keep you from doing it on top of punishing you is if you have information that is a clear and present danger to U.S. military personnel around the world or to the country at large. So let's say you have the encryption keys to the encryption communication that U.S. Special Forces are using around the world. And if you're a U.S. Special Forces, Green Beret, Navy SEAL, Force Recon, Marine Corps, all of these groups. You often operate behind enemy lines, and you're a small group, and often your most important protection is that you often know where the enemy is, but they don't know where you are. Well, using encrypted communications, they can't understand what you're saying. But if they got those encryption keys, they could understand what you're saying. They might be able to get information that tells them exactly where you are. In which case, now you're in trouble. You run a real chance of either being captured and or killed. And so if I had those encryption keys, the government could do two things to me. One, they could prevent me from publishing them. Okay? Number two, they could and would punish me. If I got a hold of those and I don't have the clearance, which I almost certainly wouldn't have, they can punish me for having that information. Okay, you can't legally have classified information if you don't have the classified clearance. And so while you might be able to publish it depending upon what the information is, if it is a clear and present danger, the U.S. government can take extraordinary measures to keep you from publishing that and then punish you for it. So like I said, you're in your house, you're trying to publish it, the FBI comes storming in. Okay, they, with guns drawn, they take you into custody, they take all your equipment, they take everything. Okay, that would be perfectly legal. Okay, and then they could then punish you. And if you got it put onto a platform, they could tell the platform to take it down. And trust me, if the platform sees that it's classified material, if it's an American platform, they're going to take it down real fast if they realize what it is. Or if they get a message from the government saying, hey, that is classified, you need to take it down. Okay. And the last area in which the government can restrict freedom of expression is to secure a fair trial. One of the things that occasionally happens, now this is usually only on the most high profile of trials, is what's known as a gag order, in which the judge can tell everybody involved, the prosecutors, defense attorneys, the defendant, the jury, witnesses, everybody involved in the trial, you may not talk about this trial with outside of the trial itself. Whether that means getting prepped, that means you're actually physically in the courtroom or whatnot. You can only talk about the trial with certain people and people that are directly involved. Now, could the judge tell us in my classroom, you may not talk about this trial? Not at all. The judge doesn't have that authority. We're not part of the trial. To try to do so would violate our First Amendment rights to freedom of expression. We have the right to say those things and talk about whatever we want to talk about in the class. Okay. Now, after the trial, then the people who are involved, a lot of those, if not all of those prohibitions, will eventually go away, unless they have sensitive information or something. Okay. And so those are the three main broad areas where the government can restrict your freedom of expression. If you don't fall underneath those, then there's nothing the government can do. Okay? And so when it comes to protected speech or freedom of expression, and I prefer the phrase freedom of expression or freedom of speech, although both are perfectly legitimate, and I myself sometimes will say freedom of speech instead of freedom of expression. But I do prefer the term freedom of expression, because free speech kind of says it's only the spoken word, or maybe the spoken and written word, where freedom of expression is a much more broad sounding concept and terminology. But both are perfectly legitimate. Okay, like I say, I myself do it occasionally, so it's not that big of a deal. Okay, well, when you look at different forms of speech, the written and spoken word is the most protected. You may write or say just about anything that you wish. You can publish and get it in front on national TV. You can get it on the internet, all over everything, and say the most racist, homophobic, transphobic, xenophobic rants that you want to. No matter how emotionally damaging it is to people, no matter how much it hurts other people. It is your right. Okay, now, if you don't like their speech, you have two options. One, and then often this is the easiest and the best thing to do, ignore them. Don't pay attention, don't get them the attention. I mean, if you're talking about groups like the Klan, the neo-Nazis, these kind of groups, they say all this stuff to get the attention. That's why they're doing it. They want to get attention for their cause, to try to drag adherents, or just to emotionally hurt those groups they don't like. Well, why do what they want? If you can ignore them, then you're probably not going to give them as much attention that they want. They're not going to get the media attention that they want. And that's not what they want. They're doing this to get their attention. The other is to debate their beliefs point by point. Say, you're wrong. Here's why, X, Y, Z. Okay. Often when you're dealing, though, with the groups like this, they're not necessarily rational. They believe they're what they believe because it makes them feel good. And it helps explain why often they haven't been a success. Because a lot of these people, and as a matter of fact, the vast majority of the people who get into things like white supremacy is because they're pretty much a failure in their life. And if you're a failure in your life, there's two things you can blame it on. You can put it on where the blame goes, almost certainly, and that is on you. But most people don't like to do that. The other thing is you can blame somebody else. And that is often much easier to do than to blame yourself. Well, when it comes to freedom of speech, the spoken or written word, there's almost nothing that is illegal that you can say the most horrendous things. One of the few exceptions is what's known as libel or slander. And libel or slander is when you say something or write something about somebody. You knew it wasn't true, or at least you should have, and it caused them harm. Okay? And probably one of the best examples of this recently would be Johnny Depp and Amber Heard. He sued her and she sued him over both libel and slander. And ironically, the jury found that they were both guilty of that. Matter of fact, Amber Heard was awarded $2 million for Johnny Depp's lawyer slandering her. Her only real problem was Johnny Depp was awarded $10.5 million for what she did. And so she owed him $8.5 million. He and her got together after a few months, and he agreed to accept $1 million. Okay, obviously, if you're Johnny Depp, the money was never the issue. Okay, but that was a great example of slander. Okay, or libel. Okay, slander being the spoken word again, libel being the written. Okay, and so the written and spoken word is the most protected. Outside of that slander, outside of that libel cases, and that's a very narrow thing. And by the way, it has to be untrue. If I publish something about somebody that is so damaging that they end up killing themselves, they commit suicide, but what I put out there was true, there's nothing that can be done. They can't sue me, the government can't come after me, because it was true. It has to be false. If it's true, it is protected free speech, no matter how emotionally, psychologically, economically, however you want to look at it, damaging it is to somebody or a group, whatever the case may be. Okay? Well, the other form of speech, and this one tends to be even more problematic and sometimes to be even more hard to deal with because it can involve so many more things, is symbolic speech. And symbolic speech are simply actions or images that convey an opinion or a belief. And so, for example, now I would strongly recommend that you don't do this, but from a constitutional point of view, shooting the bird, the middle finger, at a police officer would be protected free speech. your expression, your belief about at least that part of the government. Okay, now, is that a good idea to do that? Well, probably not. Okay, but it would be constitutionally protected. Other examples would be burning the American flag. You can go to Academy or Walmart, buy an American flag, buy a little lighter fluid, buy a lighter, soak that, go get out of Walmart, soak that flag in the lighter fluid, and set it on fire. The Supreme Court ruled in 1993, I believe, in a case involving Texas, in which Texas had a law that said desecrating a sacred object was a crime. I think it was a civil crime with a punishment of like a $500 fine. The Supreme Court struck the law down, saying that burning the American flag was freedom of expression. You were expressing your beliefs. Okay, now I would suggest strongly, if you're going to do something like that, don't do it in front of some place like a VFW hall. Okay, they are probably not going to react too well to that. Matter of fact, the U.S. Congress got within one vote in the U.S. Senate of sending a constitutional amendment to the states that would have made flag burning and other desecration of the American flag unconstitutional. And one of the striking things is that the senator that killed it was a man named John McCain. Most of you probably never heard of John McCain, but John McCain was a longtime U.S. senator, Republican. He ran for president against Obama in 2008. Obviously lost, but he ran for president. Well, why was everybody shocked when McCain cast the vote that killed this amendment? Well, he was a Navy pilot in Vietnam. He got shot down, spent 5 years in what was known as the Hanoi Hilton. It was a prisoner of war camp where he was tortured for years. If you would have saw him, his shoulders always looked weird. He couldn't raise his hands even above his shoulders because they tore his arms out of his shoulders out of their sockets repeatedly. He didn't get medical and treatment that he needed for the injuries, and so he suffered from that his entire life. And so people were absolutely stunned when he killed that amendment. When asked why would he, a prisoner of war who was tortured, would he do that? And his answer was quite simple. He said, I was there to protect those rights. He said, I went through what I went through to protect America and American rights. He said, I'll be damned if I'm going to vote them to take one of them away. Now, he did say, and this is a 70-something-year-old John McCain, said, if someone was burning the American flag in front of me and I physically still could, I would go beat the hell out of them as an individual. He said, but the government has no business telling someone they can't do that as an individual. And so flag burning, that kind of stuff are examples. What are other examples that are less controversial? Well, marches and rallies. Okay, we talked about the Civil Rights Movement when they were marching. The police turning the fire hoses, sick and attack dogs, all of those kind of things, beating them with billy clubs. That was technically violating African Americans' right to freedom of expression. Okay, you have the right to gather together and petition your government for a redress of grievances. That's what they were doing. The only requirement is that you remain peaceful. Okay, some of the Black Lives Matter protests of the 2020s, most of the people there were being nonviolent. They were doing the way they were supposed to. They're being peaceful. Unfortunately, there were groups that weren't. Kind of marred a lot of what happened. You don't have a right to go burn cars, destroy private properties, destroy public property. Okay? Well, when it comes to freedom of expression, although it has less protection than freedom of speech or written or spoken word, there are severe limits on what the government can do. So, for example, one of the few things that the government can do is it can place what's known as time, place, and manner restrictions. So, where you protest, to a certain extent, how you protest, and when you protest. So, for example, could the Ku Klux Klan, the neo-Nazis, and all these white supremacists come here to the McAllen area and say, we want a permit, we want to hold up a protest march down Expressway 83 at 8 o'clock on a Monday morning? Could the city of McAllen, Mission, Farr, wherever they wanted to do it, could they say, no, you may not march down this street at this time? And the answer is yes. And simple reason would be that would be incredibly disruptive to the traffic flows, people trying to get to work and all that kind of stuff on a Monday morning. That's one of the reasons why cities tend to have designated streets that you have parades, marches, and that kind of stuff. In McAllen, that's bicentennial. That's often where you see the parades. And so the city could say, you have to march here on bicentennial. You can do it from 10 to 11 on a Monday morning. Or you can do it from 1 to 2 on a Monday afternoon, or whatever weekday. They could tell you, you can't do it at 8 because it'd be too disruptive. Or you can't do it at 5 because it'd be too disruptive. Okay. They could also say, you've got to give us time. When a group is extremely controversial, like the white supremacists, the government has the right to get ready, to get things in place so that they can prevent, violence, that kind of stuff. But that time is limited. You're talking weeks, not months or years, or blanket no. No matter how emotionally, psychologically painful those groups having come into the valley and having their protests, the cities, the county would have to allow them to do it. Not only that, they would have to provide protection. They would have to make sure that these groups were not attacked. If they didn't, then they could possibly open themselves up to lawsuits, that kind of stuff. And so often you've heard people complain about a popular group not being able to march someplace at some time, whatever. Say like a very popular group here in the valleys are veterans. Most families here have somebody in their family who's a veteran. That they were either at least a veteran in the sense they were in the military, or they're a veteran in the sense that they fought in a foreign war. Iraq and Afghanistan right now being the two most common. But you still have people who are Vietnam veterans and Korean veterans, although almost nobody left who is a World War II veteran. And so as popular as that group is, they would tell them, no, you can't at 8 o'clock on a Friday morning or Monday morning down Expressway 83. Even if the vast majority of the population here would say, okay, we don't mind, we will tolerate the disruptions for this group. And the reason why the government can't do that is if you allow the veterans group to do it, then you're going to have to allow the Klan to do it. If you tell the Klan, no, you're not popular like the veteran groups are here, we're not going to let you do it. Yeah, I'm sorry, that doesn't fly. Okay, and you're going to have to. That's why often cities have to tell people that, groups that would be popular, that most people would accept, no, you may not do what you want to do. You have to do this. Here's where we do this. And it's because of that very reason. The government cannot be seen to be given preferential treatment based on a particular group's beliefs or who they are, and not given that treatment to a group based on who they are. And so they can place time, manner, and place restrictions. Always, though, you must be peaceful. Rioting, the destruction of public or private property is never legal. Okay? Not to mention, it tends to be counterproductive. Okay, especially some of the stuff that you saw back in the 60s and 70s, where communities who had every right to be mad often burned down some of the more important parts of their communities. I mean, they rioted into destruction where it was convenient, where they lived, and some of those neighborhoods took decades to even really begin to recover. And so it's not something you want to do. That's why if you'd have watched the protest at Ferguson, Missouri, okay, some riots, some people wanted to start destroying some of the businesses and stuff in Ferguson, and the people from Ferguson said no, they actually built human shields around these businesses. It was people from outside of the community that were wanting to do that. Well, why did they do that? Well, first, they needed those businesses. That's where they got a lot of their services from. And the businesses were owned by local African Americans. And so if you're protesting the shooting of an African American, it doesn't really make any sense to burn down a black owned business. Okay? That doesn't make a lot of sense. And those communities didn't want that to happen. And so you have to remain peaceful. And it can be problematic if you're talking about a really big group and you have a small fraction of them that want to be violent. They can cause all kinds of problems for that group. Okay, because it's often in a mass protest, it can be hard to distinguish the good guys from the bad guys. And so often everybody gets labeled, rightly or wrongly. Okay, and so that's a good place for me to stop. This video is about an hour and 15 minutes. That gets us through the First Amendment. This would usually be about close to 2 days worth of lecture. I will probably record another video dealing with the Bill of Rights and criminal defendants that you can watch if we need to. But I will see y'all on Monday. Y'all have a great day.